The autumn leaves crunched underfoot as Detective Lisa Rodriguez walked the perimeter 1247 Maple Creek Drive in suburban Grand Rapids, Michigan, on the morning of October 15, 2000. The two-story colonial house sat quietly among similar homes in the Pine Ridge subdivision, but the silence was deceptive. Inside, signs of interrupted daily life told a story of sudden, inexplicable disappearance. The Patterson family, David, 34, his wife Jennifer, 32, and their twin 8-year-old daughters, Emma and Sophie, had vanished sometime during the night of October 14th. Their absence was discovered when Emma and Sophie failed to arrive at Riverside Elementary School that Tuesday morning. When repeated calls to the house went unanswered, the school contacted David's employer, Midwest Manufacturing, where he worked as a quality control supervisor. David's supervisor, concerned by his employee's uncharacteristic absence without notification, had asked the police to conduct a welfare check. Officer Jake Martinez arrived at 12:47 p.m. to find the front door unlocked, the house empty, and no indication of where the family might have gone. Detective Rodriguez, a 12-year veteran of the Grand Rapids Police Department, had worked missing person cases before, but the Patterson disappearance felt different from the moment she stepped inside. The scene was simultaneously normal and disturbing. Breakfast dishes sat in partially bowls of cereal remained on, and the coffee maker held a full pot of coffee. Upstairs, the beds appeared to have been slept in, not made. Children's clothes were laid out for the school day, and backpacks sat packed by the front door. David's wallet remained on the bedroom dresser alongside Jennifer's purse, containing credit cards, identification, and $347 in cash. Both of the family's cell phones plugged to their the family's 2 cars, a 1999 Honda Accord and a 2001 Ford Explorer, remained in the garage. The vehicles showed no signs of tampering, and both started normally when tested. David's work clothes hung in the closet, and Jennifer's teacher materials were arranged on the kitchen counter, suggesting she had prepared lessons for her 3rd-grade class at Riverside Elementary. The Pine Ridge neighborhood was a close-knit community of young families and retirees, the kind of place where children played in front yards and neighbors knew each other's routine. The Patterson family had lived at 1247 Maple for 3 years, since David's promotion had allowed them to move from their apartment town. Detective Rodriguez began canvassing the neighborhood immediately, starting with the houses adjacent Patterson proper. The first interview was with Robert Chen, a 47-year-old auto parts warehouse manager who lived directly next door at 1245 Maple Drive. Chen appeared genuinely distressed about his neighbor's disappearance and volunteered to help with the search effort. "They're wonderful people," Chen told Rodriguez during their initial interview. "David and I usually wave to each other when we're getting the paper in the morning. Jennifer always smiles when she's working in her garden. The girls are so polite. They always say hello when outside playing." Chen reported he had last seen the Patterson family on Sunday afternoon, October 13th, when they were raking leaves in their front yard. He hadn't noticed anything unusual that evening or overnight, though he mentioned that he was a heavy sleeper and wore earplugs due to his wife's snoring. Other neighbors provided similar accounts of the Patterson family activity leading up to their disappearance. The Millers across the street had observed David washing his car on Saturday. Mrs. Harrison from 2 houses down had spoken with Jennifer on Friday while they were both checking their mailbox. Everyone described the Pattersons as a normal, happy family with no apparent problem. The neighborhood canvass revealed that no one had seen or heard anything suspicious for 14. No strange vehicles had been observed, no unusual sounds had been reported, and no one recalled seeing lights or activity at the Patterson house after normal bed. Detective Rodriguez expanded the investigation to include the family's workplace and school connection. David's colleagues at Midwest Manufacturing described him as reliable, conscientious, with no known financial difficulty or workplace conflict. Jennifer's principal, a teacher at Riverside Elementary, painted a similar picture of a dedicated educator who loved her job and was devoted to her students. The family's financial records, obtained through court order, showed no irregularities or unusual transactions. Their bank accounts contained modest but stable balances, and their credit cards showed only routine purchases for groceries, gas, and household items. There were no large cash withdrawals or suspicious expenditure in the weeks leading up to their disappearance. By the evening of October 15th, Detective Rodriguez had established a basic timeline and gathered preliminary information, but she had no concrete leads about what had happened to the Patterson family. The case had all the hallmarks of an abduction, but the lack of physical evidence or witness accounts made determining the perpetrator's identity extremely difficult. The Grand Rapids Police Department organized search teams to comb the surrounding areas, including nearby parks, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings. Volunteers from the Pine Ridge neighborhood joined the search effort, with Robert Chen taking a particularly active role in coordinating millions and providing suggestions about location. Detective Rodriguez appreciated the community's willingness to help, but she also recognized that the involvement of so many volunteers could potentially compromise evidence or contaminate crime scenes. She made detailed notes about who participated in the searches and what areas they covered. Standard procedure for missing person investigation. The Michigan State Police were notified about the disappearance, and an Amber Alert was issued for Emma and Sophie Patterson. The alert description included photographs from the family's most recent school pictures and detailed physical descriptions of all 4 family members. Local media outlets began covering the story, generating public interest and additional tips for investigators Sue. As the first day of investigation concluded, Detective Rodriguez felt the familiar frustration of a case with more questions than answers. The Patterson family had simply vanished from their secure suburban home without leaving any obvious clues about their fate or the identity of whoever was responsible. What Detective Rodriguez couldn't have known as she reviewed her notes that first evening was that one of her most helpful witnesses and search volunteers was actually the person responsible for the family's disappearance. Robert Chen's concerned demeanor and eagerness to assist the investigation were carefully calculated performances designed to deflect suspicion while allowing him to monitor the investigation's progress. The case that would consume the next 20 years Detective Rodriguez's career had begun with a family's breakfast dishes still sitting in their sink and a neighbor's offer to help find them. The truth about what happened on Maple Creek Drive would prove far more complex and disturbing than anyone initially imagined, involving organized crime connections, corrupt officials, and a carefully orchestrated cover-up that nearly succeeded in hiding the truth forever. The morning of October 16, 2002, brought an outpouring of community support that both inspired and complicated Detective Rodriguez's investigation. By 7 a.m., over 50 volunteers had gathered at Pine Ridge Elementary School's parking lot, which had been designated as the command center for a civilian search effort. Among the organizers stood Robert Chen, clipboard in hand, directing search teams with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex operations. Chen had arrived at the school before sunrise, setting up folding tables and preparing maps of the surrounding area, marked with grid pattern system. His wife, Margaret, distributed coffee and sandwiches to volunteers, while their teenage daughter, Amy, helped coordinate communication between search teams using handheld radios Chen had somehow acquired overnight. We need to be methodical about his voice carrying the authority of someone in leadership. The police are handling the official investigation, but we know this area better than anyone. We're going to search every inch, Pine Ridge, and the surrounding neighborhood until we find the Detective Rodriguez observed Chen's organization with perfection. The man had clearly spent considerable time planning the search, creating detailed maps, establishing communication protocols that would have impressed experienced emergency management personnel. His dedication to finding his missing neighbor seemed genuine and tireless. The search teams Chen organized covered an impressive area during their first full day of operation. Groups of volunteers combed through Riverside Park, the wooded areas behind the Pine Ridge subdivision, and the commercial district along the 8th Street. Chen personally led a team that searched the abandoned Keller Furniture Warehouse, explaining that he knew the building's layout from his work in logistics. As the investigation progressed, Detective Rodriguez began building a more detailed Patterson family's life and potential connection to criminal activity. David Patterson's employment at Midwest Manufacturing brought him into union suppliers contract who moved in different social circles suburban. Jennifer Patterson's role as an elementary school teacher seemed to offer fewer potential connections to criminal elements, but Rodriguez knew that schools sometimes became inadvertent witnesses to neighborhood drug activity or domestic violence situation that could escalate unexpectedly. She interviewed Jennifer's colleagues and students' parents, searching for any indication that the teacher had observed something that might have put her family at risk. The investigation revealed that David Patterson had been involved in quality control for automotive parts that were supplied to several major Michigan manufacturers. His position required him to identify defective components and reject shipment that didn't. Rodriguez wondered if David might have discovered evident deliberate problem or fraudulent practice that could have motivated someone to silence him. However, David's supervisor and colleagues insisted that he had never reported anything unusual or expressed concerns about his work environment. His quality control reports were routine, and his interactions with suppliers and contractors had been professional and unremitting. The manufacturing connection seemed like a dead end. The family's personal relationships also appeared normal and stable. David and Jennifer had been married for 12 years, since meeting in college at Western Michigan University. Their friends described them as devoted parents who were actively involved in their daughter's school and extracurricular activities. Neither had a history of substance abuse, gambling, or other high-risk behaviors that might have attracted criminal attention. Financial investigations similarly yielded no obvious motives for the disappearance. The Patterson family lived modest, had no significant debts beyond their mortgage and car payment, and showed no signs of the financial stress that sometimes led to family violence or involvement. Their credit reports were clean, and their bank records showed no unusual transactions. Detective Rodriguez expanded the investigation to include the broader Pine Ridge neighborhood, looking for any recent criminal activity or suspicious incident might be connected to the Patterson disappearance. The subdivision had experienced typical suburban crime, occasional break-in, vandalism, teenage, and minor disputes between neighbors, but nothing that suggested organized criminal activity or serious violence. Robert Chen continued to be an invaluable resource in investigation, providing detailed information about neighborhood dynamics and suggesting potential leads for Rodriguez to pursue. He knew which residents had security cameras, which families had teenage children who might have been out late on October 14th, and which houses had dogs that typically barked at unusual activity. "I've lived here for 8 years, Chen." During one of their regular conversations, you get to know the patterns, the routines. David always brought his garbage cans back from the curb by Tuesday morning. Jennifer usually had her classroom lights on until at least 9 p.m. when she was grading paper. The girls always practiced piano on Monday evening. You could hear it. Chen's observations were detailed, confirmed by other neighbors. His knowledge of the community extended beyond the immediate vicinity of Maple Drive to include the adjacent subdivisions, local businesses, and the network of parks and walking trails that connected the residential area. The volunteer search efforts organized by Chen expanded throughout the week, with different groups taking responsibility for specific area and time period. Chen maintained detailed logs of where teams had searched, what they had found, and which areas needed follow-up. His organizational skills impressed both volunteers and police officers who worked with the civilian searcher. Despite the extensive search, no trace of the Patterson family was discovered during the first week of the investigation. The volunteers had covered hundreds of acres of parks, vacant lots, wooded areas, and abandoned buildings without finding any evidence of the missing family. Detective Rodriguez began to suspect that the Pattersons were no longer in the immediate Grand Rapids area. The case attracted media attention beyond the local news outlet, with regional television stations and newspapers covering the search efforts and interviewing family members, neighbors, and investigators. Robert Chen became a frequent spokesman for the volunteer searchers, articulating the community's determination to find the missing family and their appreciation for professional law enforcement. "We're not going to give up," Chen told a Wood TV reporter during a filmed interview in front of the Patterson. "This is our neighborhood, our friends, our community. Everyone who lives here has children or grandchildren. We understand that this could happen to anyone, and we're going to do everything possible to bring the Patterson family home safely." Chen's media appearances were articulate and compelling, presenting him as a concerned neighbor and community leader who was coordinating volunteer efforts while supporting a enforcement activity. His statements struck the right balance between optimism about finding the family alive and realistic acknowledgement of the challenges faced by the investigation. As the first week of investigation concluded, Detective Rodriguez had developed a professional respect for Robert Chen's organizational abilities and community leadership. The man had mobilized neighborhood resources more effectively than many professional emergency management coordinators, and his intimate knowledge of the area had provided valuable insight. The official What Rodriguez didn't yet realize was that Chen's detailed knowledge of search procedures, his understanding of police investigative methods, and his ability to coordinate complex operations reflected skills developed through years of involvement in criminal enterprise extended far beyond suburban. His eagerness to help find the Patterson family was motivated not by genuine concern for his neighbors, but by the need to monitor and misdirect an investigation that could expose activities worth millions of dollars. Chen's carefully cultivated image as a dedicated neighbor and community volunteer provided perfect cover for someone who needed to stay close to the investigation while ensuring that searchers never looked in the right place. His detailed maps and systematic search grids were designed to appear thorough while avoiding the locations where evidence of his crime was discovered. The community's trust in Robert Chen would prove to be one of the greatest obstacles to solving the Patterson case, as investigators found themselves relying on information and suggestions provided by the very person they should have been investigating. 2 weeks into the investigation, Detective Rodriguez received what appeared to be the first significant break in the Patterson. A witness called the tip line, claiming to have seen a family matching the Pattersons' description at a rest stop near Kalamazoo on the evening of October 14th. The caller, who identified himself as a truck driver, reported seeing a man, woman, and 2 young girls who appeared distressed, accompanied by 2 other men who seemed to be controlling their movement. Rodriguez immediately coordinated with Michigan State Police to investigate the reported sighting. The rest stop security cameras had been malfunctioning for several days, providing no video evidence to confirm or refute the witness account. The tip seemed credible enough to warrant shifting investigative resources toward the theory that the Patterson family had been abducted and transported out of the Grand Rapids area. Robert Chen was among the first to learn about the Kalamazoo lead, having positioned himself as an unofficial liaison between the police department and the volunteer search groups. When Rodriguez briefed him about the potential sighting, Chen immediately offered to coordinate expanded search efforts in the Kalamazoo region, demonstrating the same organizational enthusiasm he'd shown in Grand Rapids. "This could be exactly what we've been hoping for," Chen told Rodriguez during their conversation about that. "If someone took them southwest toward Kalamazoo, they might be holding them somewhere in that area. I know some people who work for trucking company on there. I could reach out to see if they've noticed anything unusual." Chen's offer to leverage his professional contacts seemed valuable, given his work in logistics and supply chain management. Rodriguez appreciated having a knowledgeable civilian volunteer who understood the transportation industry and could provide insights about potential hiding places or movement patterns that might not be obvious to law enforcement officers. However, the Kalamazoo lead ultimately proved to be another dead end. Intensive investigation revealed that the truck driver who'd called in the tip had misremembered the date of his observation, and the family he'd seen was eventually identified as tourists from Ohio who were traveling to visit relatives. The time and effort spent pursuing this false lead consumed valuable investigative resources, while the real trail grew colder. The pattern of false leads and misdirection would plague the Patterson investigation for months. Tips poured in from across Michigan and neighboring states, with witnesses reporting sightings of the missing family in locations from Detroit, Chicago, Cleveland. Each lead required consuming detective hours and diverting attention. Detective Rodriguez began to notice that many of the most promising leads seemed to originate from sources that were difficult to verify or follow up on effectively. Anonymous callers provided detailed information that couldn't be corroborated. Witnesses disappeared before they could be interviewed thoroughly, and physical evidence that seemed important initially proved to be unrelated to the case. Robert Chen remained actively involved in evaluating and pursuing these, often providing background information or suggesting investigative approaches that seemed logical and well. His continued dedication to finding his missing neighbors impressed Rodriguez and other investigators, who viewed him as one of their most reliable civilian resources. "I've been thinking about the timeline," Chen told Rodriguez during one of their regular discussions of the case. "If someone took the Patterson family during the night, they would have needed transportation and a destination. The fact that both cars remained in the garage suggests the abductor had his own vehicle or access to one. Maybe we should focus on rental car wrecks or look for reports of stolen vehicles from that time period." Chen's suggestions were consistently logical and demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of investigative procedure. Rodriguez began incorporating his ideas into her official investigation plans, appreciating the perspective of someone who knew the family and neighborhood intimately while also possessing analytical skills that complemented her professional training. The investigation expanded to include examination of rental car records, stolen vehicle reports, and surveillance footage from businesses along potential escape routes. This work was time-intensive and ultimately unproductive, but it seemed like a reasonable approach based on the evidence available and the suggestions provided by knowledgeable community member Chen. As winter approached, the volunteer search efforts organized by Chen evolved into a more structured, long-term operation. He established a permanent command post in the Pine Ridge Elementary School gymnasium, complete with maps, communication equipment, and filing systems for organizing tips and coordinating search activity. The operation resembled a professional missing persons investigation more than a typical community volunteer effort. Chen's organizational abilities impressed law enforcement officials who worked with the volunteer group. Sheriff's deputies, state police officers assisted search operations, commented on the civilian efforts' professionalism and effective. Chen's ability to coordinate dozens of volunteers, maintain detailed records, and interface effectively with law enforcement suggested experience in emergency management, military operations. However, Chen's background check revealed only his civilian employment history and residence in the Pine Ridge neighborhood. He had no military service record, no emergency management training, and no obvious explanation for his sophisticated search, and when questioned about his organizational skills, he attributed them to his work experience in logistics and supply chain management. The third major false lead in the Patterson case involved a reported connection to drug trafficking activities in the Grand Rapids area. An informant contacted the Drug Enforcement Administration claiming that David Patterson had witnessed illegal activities related to methamphetamine distribution and had been eliminated to prevent him from cooperating with law enforcement. This lead seemed more promising than previous tips because it provided a plausible motive for the family's disappearance and connected to known criminal activity in the region. DEA agents collaborated with Rodriguez to investigate the alleged drug connection, interviewing known dealers and examining financial records for evidence of Patterson family involvement in illegal drug market. Robert Chen expressed particular interest in the drug traffic theory, volunteering to provide information about neighborhood residents who might have connections to illegal activities. His willingness to discuss potentially dangerous criminal matters impressed investigators, who viewed his cooperation as evidence of genuine commitment to finding his missing neighbor. "I hate to say this about people in our neighborhood," Chen told DEA agent during a interview, "but there have been some residents whose behavior seemed suspicious. Late-night visitors, unusual amounts of cash, vehicles that don't match the parent income level. I never wanted to make accusations without evidence might have the Patterson family I think you should know about." Chen provided detailed information, several, including specific addresses, vehicle descriptions, and observed behavior patterns that seemed consistent with drug trafficking activity. His information was specific enough to warrant follow-up investigation, and he seemed genuinely concerned about the possibility that criminal activity in the neighborhood might have endangered the Patterson family. However, investigation of the residents Chen had identified revealed no evidence of drug trafficking or other criminal activity. Most of the suspicious behaviors he'd reported had innocent explanations: shift work that required unusual hours, legitimate business activities that involved cash transactions, or family financial situations that were more complex than they appeared to neighbors. The drug trafficking theory eventually proved to be as false as the previous leads, but it consumed weeks of investigative time and diverted resources from other aspects of the case. The pattern of promising leads that ultimately proved worthless was becoming a defining characteristic of the Patterson investigation. Detective Rodriguez began to feel frustrated by the investigation's lack of progress and the constant stream of false leads that seemed designed to waste time and resources. She started documenting the sources and characteristic tips, looking for patterns might explain why so many leads proved to be deliberately misleading rather than simply mistaken. What Rodriguez didn't yet realize was that many of the false leads were being generated by someone with intimate knowledge of the investigation's progress and the investigative techniques being employed. Robert Chen's access to police information, combined with his ability to suggest new lines of inquiry, allowed him to continuously misdirect the investigation while appearing to be one of its most dedicated supporters. Chen's sophisticated understanding of law enforcement procedures enabled him to craft false leads that were credible enough to warrant investigation, but ultimately fruitless enough to waste resources without producing a result. His position as a trusted community volunteer and information source gave him the perfect cover for sabotaging the very investigation he appeared to be supporting. The misdirection strategy was working precisely as Chen had planned, keeping investigators focused on external threats and distant locations while preventing them from examining the neighborhood and residence where the real evidence lay hidden. His helpful demeanor and consistent availability made him one of the last people anyone would suspect of involvement in the crimes they were to solve. By the spring of 2003, Detective Rodriguez had begun to suspect that the Patterson case was more complex than a random family abduction. The pattern of sophisticated false leads, the absence of physical evidence, and the organized nature of what appeared to be an ongoing cover-up suggested involvement by individuals with experience in criminal enterprises and law enforcement evasion techniques. Rodriguez's suspicions were confirmed when federal agents from the FBI's Grand Rapids field office contacted her about potential connections between the Patterson disappearance and a broader investigation into organized crime activities in western Michigan. Special Agent Sarah Martinez explained that the Bureau had been monitoring a network of criminal enterprises involving labor union corruption, illegal gambling, and money laundering operations centered in the automotive industry. We've been tracking financial transactions and communication patterns that suggest a significant criminal organization operating throughout the Midwest, Agent Martinez told Rodriguez during their initial meeting. Several of our ongoing investigations have identified Grand Rapids as a key location for money laundering and illegal gambling operations. The Patterson disappearance might be connected to witness elimination activity. The federal investigation revealed that western Michigan had become a hub for criminal activities that extended far beyond traditional organized crime families. The network included corrupt union officials, casino operators, automotive industry executives, and law enforcement personnel who facilitated illegal gambling, loan sharking, and money laundering operations worth millions of dollars annually. Agent Martinez explained that the criminal network had evolved to take advantage of Michigan's economic transformation and the proliferation of Native American casinos that provided opportunities for illegal financial activities. The organization's sophistication rivaled traditional organized crime families, but their structure was more fluid and harder to penetrate using conventional law enforcement techniques. Detective Rodriguez shared her case files with the federal agent, including her detailed documentation of false leads and the organized civilian search efforts led by Robert Chen. Agent Martinez was particularly interested in Chen's background and his seemingly sophisticated understanding of investigation procedure and search operation. This level of organization and coordination isn't typical for civilian volunteer effort, Martinez observed after reviewing Chen's search operation documentation. The communication protocols, record-keeping systems, and coordination with multiple law enforcement agencies suggest someone with professional experience in these areas. A deeper background investigation into Robert Chen revealed information that hadn't appeared in routine checks conducted during the initial investigation. While Chen's official employment history showed consistent work in logistics and supply chain management, financial analysis revealed income patterns and asset holdings that didn't align with his reported salary and job responsibility. Chen owned several properties in addition to his Pine Ridge residence, including commercial real estate in Grand Rapids and Detroit that generated substantial rental income. His financial portfolio included investments in companies connected to the automotive industry and entertainment businesses that served as fronts for illegal gambling operations. Most significantly, Chen's phone records showed regular communication with individuals who were subjects of ongoing federal organized crime investigations. His contacts included union officials, casino operators, and trucking company executives who were suspected of facilitating money laundering and illegal gambling activities throughout the Midwest. The federal investigation also revealed that Chen had been using his legitimate employment in logistics to provide services for criminal enterprise, including transportation coordination for illegal gambling operations and money laundering through commercial trucking activity. His position gave him access to shipping networks and financial systems that were valuable for moving money and goods outside normal regulatory oversight. Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez developed a strategy for investigating Chen's potential involvement while continuing to monitor activities and connection to the broader criminal network. The investigation required careful coordination to avoid alerting Chen or his associate to law enforcement interest in their activities. The first phase of the expanded investigation involved surveillance of Chen's daily activities and communication patterns. Federal agents used sophisticated electronic surveillance techniques to monitor his phone conversations, financial transactions, and meetings with known criminal associates. The surveillance had to be conducted carefully to avoid detection, given Chen's apparent sophistication and awareness of law enforcement technique. Surveillance revealed that Chen maintained regular contact with several individuals who were subjects of ongoing federal investigation, including Vincent Torino, casino operator suspected of money laundering, and Michael Kowalski, a union official connected to construction industry corruption. Chen's conversations with these individuals were cautious and coded, but they suggested ongoing coordination of illegal activity. Most disturbing was evidence that Chen was providing information about the Patterson investigation to his criminal associate, apparently as part of ongoing efforts to ensure the case remained unsolved. Wiretapped conversations revealed that Chen was reporting on investigative progress, potential leads, and law enforcement activities that might threaten criminal operations. The family situation remains contained, Chen was recorded telling Vincent Torino during a February 2003 phone conversation. Local law enforcement continues to follow external leads, and there's no indication they're focusing on neighborhood activities. The volunteer search effort, excellent cover for monitoring their progress. The wiretapped conversations provided federal agent evidence that Chen was actively obstructing the Patterson investigation while maintaining his public image as a concerned neighbor and dedicated volunteer. His access to investigation information through his role as civilian coordinator allowed him to provide real-time intelligence to criminal associates about law enforcement activity. Further investigation revealed that Chen's criminal activities extended beyond the Patterson case to include coordination of illegal gambling operations that used his logistics expertise to move money and equipment between different locations. He had been instrumental in establishing casino money laundering operations that processed millions of dollars in illegal gambling profit. The federal agents also discovered that Chen had connections to corrupt law enforcement officers who provided protection for criminal activities in exchange for financial compensation. These connections explained how the criminal network had been able to operate with relative impunity despite ongoing law enforcement attention. Detective Rodriguez found it difficult to accept that someone she had worked with closely for months was actually responsible for the crime she was investigating. Chen's helpful demeanor, organizational skills, and apparent dedication to finding the Patterson family had made him one of her most trusted civilian sources. "I've been talking to him almost daily for 6 months," Rodriguez told Agent Martinez during one of their coordination meetings. "He's provided more useful information and suggestions than most of my official sources. The idea that he's been manipulating the investigation while pretending to help is almost impossible to believe." Agent Martinez explained that Chen's behavior was consistent with sophisticated criminal enterprise that had learned to penetrate and manipulate law enforcement investigation. His willingness to become deeply involved in the search efforts provided perfect cover for monitoring investigative progress while misdirecting attention away from his own activity. The revelation about Chen's true nature forced Rodriguez to reconsider every aspect of the Patterson investigation from a new perspective. Leads that Chen had suggested pursuing, information he had provided about neighborhood dynamics, and search area had recommended suddenly seemed potentially designed to waste time and resources while protecting the locations where evidence might actually be found. The federal investigation had revealed that the Patterson family's disappearance was connected to a criminal network that was much larger and more sophisticated than initially suspected. Chen's involvement suggested that the case would require resources and investigative techniques beyond what local law enforcement could provide independently. Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez began developing a comprehensive strategy for investigating Chen and his criminals while building a case that could successfully prosecute everyone involved in the Patterson disappearance and the broader criminal enterprise. The investigation would require months of additional work and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies. The discovery of Chen's criminal connections had answered some questions about the Patterson case, but it had also revealed the true scope and complexity of the criminal activities they were investigating. The helpful neighbor who had organized search efforts, provided investigative suggestions, was actually the person responsible for the family's disappearance and the sophisticated cover-up that had nearly succeeded in the truth. The federal investigation into Robert Chen and his criminal associates consumed the next 3 years without producing the breakthrough that Detective Rodriguez and Agent Martinez had hoped would finally solve the Patterson case. Despite sophisticated surveillance techniques, financial analysis, and coordination with multiple law enforcement agencies, the criminal network proved frustratingly resilient and adaptive. Chen's awareness of law enforcement attention became apparent by late 2003 when surveillance teams noticed significant changes in his behavior and communication pattern. He became more cautious in his phone conversation, varied his daily routines to make surveillance difficult, and appeared to be conducting counter-surveillance operations to detect law enforcement activity. The criminal organization's adaptation increased law enforcement pressure, demonstrated a level of sophistication that rivaled traditional organized crime family. Members used encrypted communication devices, employed professional counter-surveillance techniques, and maintained operational security protocols that made penetrating their activities extremely difficult. Detective Rodriguez found the investigation's slow progress particularly frustrating because she remained convinced that Chen possessed information that could resolve the Patterson case definitively. However, federal agents cautioned that moving too quickly could compromise the broader investigation and allow other criminal network members to escape prosecution. "We're not just investigating a single disappearance anymore," Agent Martinez explained to Rodriguez during one of their regular coordination meetings. "Chen's organization has connections that extend across multiple states and involve millions of dollars in illegal activities. If we focus too narrowly on the Patterson case, we might miss the opportunity to dismantle an entire criminal enterprise." The federal approach required patience and comprehensive evidence development that would ensure successful prosecution of all network members. However, this strategy meant that the Patterson family's fate remained unresolved, while investigators worked to build cases against criminal associates who might have had no direct involvement in the disappearance. By 2000, the investigation had identified connections between Chen's network and criminal enterprises in Detroit, Chicago, and several smaller Midwest cities. The organization's activities included illegal gambling operations, money laundering through legitimate businesses, and corruption of public officials who provided protection and information in exchange for financial compensation. The complexity of the criminal network made traditional investigation techniques less effective than they would have been against simpler criminal organizations. Wiretaps produced conversations that were heavily coded and often meaningless without extensive content and analysis. Financial investigations revealed sophisticated money laundering operations that moved funds through multiple jurisdictions and business entities. Most frustrating for Detective Rodriguez was the realization that Chen had been using his access to the Patterson investigation to provide intelligence to his criminal associates about law enforcement activities throughout western Michigan. His position as a trusted civilian volunteer had given him insights into police operations that were valuable for protecting other criminal enterprises. The federal investigation revealed that Chen's network had been responsible for several other disappearances and suspicious deaths throughout the region. Though building prosecutable cases required extensive investigation and evidence development, the Patterson family appeared to be just one example of the organization's willingness to use violence to protect their illegal activities. Agent Martinez's team identified at least 4 other cases where individuals who might have posed threats to the criminal network had disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances. These cases included a union accountant who had discovered financial irregularities, a casino employee who had reported illegal gambling activity, and 2 trucking company drivers who had witnessed money laundering operations. However, proving connections between these cases and Chen's criminal network required evidence that was difficult to obtain without compromising ongoing investigation. The organization's sophisticated operational security measures made gathering direct evidence of criminal activity extremely challenging. The investigation further complicated by evidence of corruption within law enforcement agencies that had been providing protection and information to the criminal network. Several police officers and sheriff's deputies had been receiving payments from Chen's associates in exchange for intelligence about ongoing investigation and advance warning about planned law enforcement operations. Identifying and prosecuting the corrupt law enforcement required careful investigation to avoid alerting other network members who might destroy evidence or flee the jury. Internal affairs investigations moved slowly and often produced results that were insufficient for criminal prosecution, even when misconduct was clearly documented. Detective Rodriguez found herself questioning colleagues and superiors who had access to information about the Patterson investigation, wondering whether some of the investigation's problems might be due to internal security breaches rather than simply the criminal network's sophistication. "I've been sharing case information with people I trusted completely," Rodriguez told Agent Martinez during a particularly frustrating period in 2005. "The possibility that some of that information might have been passed to Chen or his associates makes me question everything about how we've been handling this investigation." The federal agents implemented enhanced security protocols for the Patterson investigation, limiting access to sensitive information and conducting background investigations of law enforcement personnel who had been involved in the case. These measures helped protect ongoing operations, but also created additional administrative burdens and coordination. By 2006, the investigation had consumed enormous resources while producing limited prosecutable results. Several lower-level criminal associates had been arrested and convicted on charges related to illegal gambling, money laundering. Chen and the organization's leadership remained untouchable due to their sophisticated operational security. The lack of progress on the Patterson case created additional pressure for Detective Rodriguez, who faced criticism from supervisors and community members who wanted answers about the missing family's fate. The case had become the most high-profile, unsolved crime in Grand Rapids, and Rodriguez's inability to produce results affected her profession. Robert Chen continued his activities as a community volunteer and concerned neighbor, maintaining the image criminal enterprise. He occasionally contacted Rodriguez to offer suggestions about new leads or to inquire about investigation progress, demonstrating remarkable audacity in maintaining his helpful persona. The federal investigation's focus had necessarily expanded beyond the Patterson encompassed the broader criminal network, but this expansion meant that the specific question of what had happened to David, Jennifer, Emma, and Sophie Patterson remained unresolved. The family's fate had become secondary to the larger law enforcement objective. Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez recognized that they needed a different approach to break through the criminal network's defenses and obtain the evidence necessary to solve the Patterson case. Traditional investigation techniques were proving insufficient against an organization that had learned to adapt to and counter law enforcement activity. The breakthrough would eventually come from an unexpected source and through circumstances that neither investigator could have predicted. However, by 2006, both Rodriguez and Martinez had begun to fear that the Patterson case might remain forever unsolved, another example of how sophisticated criminal organizations could defeat even determined and well-resourced law enforcement. The years of frustration had taught both investigators valuable lessons about the evolution of organized crime and the challenges facing modern law enforcement agents. However, these lessons provided little comfort to the Patterson family's relatives and friends, who continued to hope for answers that seemed increasingly unlikely to ever be provided. The helpful neighbor who had joined the search efforts continued to live next door to the Patterson family's empty house, maintaining the lawn and occasionally checking on the property, courtesy to the relatives still owned it. His continued presence in the neighborhood served as a daily reminder of the investigation's failure to achieve justice for the missing family. The year 2008 brought significant advances in digital forensics and data analysis capabilities that offered new possibilities for investigating cold cases like the Patterson appearance. Detective Rodriguez, now a sergeant with Grand Rapids Police Department, convinced her supervisors to authorize a comprehensive review of the case using modern investigative techniques and enhanced federal cooperation. The technological revolution in law enforcement had made it possible to analyze communication patterns, financial transactions, and travel records with unprecedented sophistication. Cell phone location data, credit card transaction records, and digital communications that had been primitive or non-existent in 2002 could now be examined using advanced analytical software. Agent Martinez, now a supervisory special agent with the FBI's Organized Crime Division, had maintained her interest in the Patterson case throughout the intervening years. Her broader investigation into the Midwest criminal network had continued, producing several successful prosecutions while building a comprehensive understanding of the organization's structure and operation. The decision to reopen the Patterson case using modern techniques was motivated partly by technological capabilities and partly by changes in the criminal network that made some members potentially more vulnerable to law enforcement pressure. Several key figures had been arrested on unrelated charges, creating opportunities for cooperation agreements that might provide new information. The first major breakthrough came from enhanced analysis of cell phone records from October 2002. While cell phone location tracking had been primitive at the time of the original investigation, archived data could now be processed using sophisticated algorithms that revealed movement patterns and communication nets that hadn't been visible with earlier analysis. Robert Chen's cell phone records from October 15, 2002 showed a pattern of activity that contradicted his statements to investigators about his activities during the time period when the Patterson family disappeared. His phone had been turned off for several hours during the night, and location data showed movement was inconsistent with being asleep at his residence. More significantly, analysis of communication patterns revealed that Chen had been in contact with several known criminal associates during the weeks leading up to the Patterson disappearance. The timing and frequency of these communications suggested coordination of activities that might have been related to the family's abduction. The enhanced cell phone analysis also revealed that Chen had received a call at 2:17 a.m. on October 15, 2002, from a number registered to Vincent Torino, the casino operator who was a subject of ongoing federal investigation. The call had lasted 14 minutes. Chen's phone had been moving through the Pine Ridge neighborhood during the conversation. Detective Rodriguez and Agent Martinez recognized that the cell phone evidence, while not conclusive, provided the strongest indication yet that Chen had been involved in activities related to the Patterson disappearance. The evidence supported their suspicions, but would require additional corroboration to be useful for prosecution purposes. The second major advancement involved analysis of financial records using sophisticated data mining techniques that could identify patterns and connections that weren't apparent through traditional accounting methods. The analysis revealed a complex network of financial relationships between Chen and various criminal associates that demonstrated the scope of his illegal activity. Most significantly, financial analysis revealed that Chen had made substantial cash deposits in the days following the Patterson disappearance, including deposits that were structured to avoid federal reporting requirements. The timing and amounts of these deposits suggested payment for services rendered during the time period when the family had vanished. The financial investigation also revealed that Chen had been providing funding for criminal associates' legal defense costs when they were arrested on various charges. This pattern of financial support demonstrated his central role in the criminal network and his commitment to protecting associates who might have information about his illegal activity. Enhanced analysis of business records, property transactions revealed that Chen had been using legitimate business entities to launder money from illegal gambling and other criminal activity. His logistic supply chain expertise provided perfect cover for moving money and goods commercial transportation network. The third technological advancement involved digital forensics analysis of computer equipment that had been seized during various searches related to the broader criminal network investigation. Advanced data recovery techniques could now extract information from damaged, deliberately wiped storage devices that had been impossible to analyze with earlier methods. Computer forensics specialists recovered encrypted files from equipment associated with Chen's business operation that contained detailed records of illegal gambling activity, money laundering transactions, and communications with criminal associates. The recovered data provided a comprehensive picture of the criminal network's structure and operation. Most importantly, the computer analysis revealed references to the neighborhood situation and family containment in communications between Chen and his associate that appeared to relate to the Patterson case. While the references were coded and not explicitly detailed, they provided additional evidence of Chen's involvement in criminal activities related to his neighbors. The fourth major development involved cooperation criminal associates who had been arrested on unrelated charges and were seeking to reduce their sentences through cooperation with federal investigators. Several individuals provided information about Chen's criminal activities, though none had direct knowledge of the Patterson disappearance. Vincent Torino, the casino operator who had been in phone contact with Chen on the night of the disappearance, was arrested on federal money laundering charges in late 2008. Facing a lengthy prison sentence, Torino agreed to cooperate with investigators and provided detailed information about the criminal network's structure. Torino's cooperation revealed that Chen had been coordinating illegal gambling operations and money laundering activities throughout western Michigan for several years. He confirmed that Chen was a central figure in the criminal network, though Torino claimed to have no direct knowledge of any violence or its appearance. However, Torino did provide information about Chen's relation with other criminal associates who were known to use violence when necessary to protect the organization's interests. This information helped investigators understand how the criminal network operated, who might have been involved in activities like the Patterson disappearance. The combination of technological advances and cooperation criminal associates provided Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez with their best evidence, yet that Robert Chen was responsible for the Patterson family's disappearance. However, they still lacked the direct evidence to obtain search warrant arrest. The investigators recognized that they needed to develop a strategy for gathering additional evidence while preventing Chen from destroying materials or fleeing the jurisdiction. The criminal network's demonstrated sophistication and counter-surveillance capability made any enforcement action extremely risky. Agent Martinez proposed using an undercover operation to penetrate Chen's organization and gather direct evidence of his criminal activity. The operation would require extensive preparation and coordination, but it offered the best chance of obtaining the evidence necessary to solve the Patterson case definitively. Detective Rodriguez supported the undercover approach, recognizing that traditional investigation techniques had proven insufficient against Chen's sophisticated operational security measures. The case had consumed 6 years of investigative effort, and more aggressive tactics seemed necessary to achieve results. The technological advances had provided new hope that the Patterson case could finally be solved, but they had also revealed the true sophistication of the criminal organization they were invested. The evidence gathered through modern analytical techniques would prove crucial in the final phase of investigation, but significant challenges remained in converting that evidence into successful prosecution. In early 2009, the FBI launched an elaborate undercover operation designed to penetrate Robert Chen's criminal network and gather direct evidence of his involvement in the Patterson disappearance. The operation required extensive planning and coordination between multiple law enforcement agencies, given the organization's demonstrated sophistication and counter-surveillance capability. Special Agent David Kim was selected for the undercover assignment based on his Korean-American background, which provided credible ethnicity for infiltrating Chen's largely Asian-American criminal associate. Kim had extensive experience in organized crime investigations, specialized training in long-term undercover operations that would be essential for penetrating a sophisticated criminal network. Agent Kim adopted the identity of David Park, a businessman with logistics and transportation expertise who was interested in expanding into the Midwest gambling market. His background was carefully constructed to appeal to Chen's organization while providing legitimate reasons for seeking involvement in their illegal activity. The operation began with Kim establishing legitimate business operation in Grand Rapids, including a small trucking company and logistics consulting firm that provided cover for his presence in the area. These businesses were fully functional and generated actual revenue, making his identity more credible when subjected to background investigation of suspicious criminal. Kim's initial contact with Chen's network came through Vincent Torino, who had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators while maintaining his public appearance as a criminal associate. Torino introduced Kim to mid-level network members, potential partner for expanding gambling operations into Korean-American communities in Detroit and Grand Rapids. The introduction strategy allowed Kim to gradually work his way closer to Chen's inner circle while establishing credibility as someone with valuable skills and connections. His legitimate logistics expertise was genuinely useful for the criminal networks, making him a potential partner rather than an obvious infiltrator. Chen's initial meetings with Kim were cautious and carefully controlled, reflecting the network leader's awareness of law enforcement attention and his sophisticated approach to operational security. Chen conducted extensive background checks on Kim's business and personal history, using both legitimate investigative services and criminal network resources. However, the FBI's backstopping operations comprehensive enough to withstand Chen's scrutiny. Kim's business operation genuine. His personal history was thoroughly documented, and his financial records reflected legitimate business activities that were consistent with his cover identity. Over several months, Kim gradually gained Chen's trust by demonstrating valuable contribution to the network's operation. His logistics expertise helped optimize illegal gambling operations, and his connections in Korean-American community provided opportunities for expanding money laundering activities. Kim's acceptance into Chen's inner circle provided unprecedented the criminal network's structure. He attended planning meetings, participated in coordination of legal activities, and gained insights into the organization's methods that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigation techniques. The undercover operation required Kim to balance gathering evidence with maintaining cover and avoiding participation in criminal activity. FBI supervisors and legal counsel provided ongoing guidance about acceptable levels of involvement while ensuring that Kim's activities wouldn't compromise potential prosecutors. Chen's conversations with Kim gradually revealed details about the criminal network's history and operation, including oblique references to problems that had been resolved through permanent measures. While Chen never explicitly discussed the Patterson disappearance, his comments suggested awareness of violent solutions to threats against the organization. Most significantly, Kim observed Chen's detailed knowledge of law enforcement investigation techniques and his apparent access to information about ongoing police activities. Chen frequently made comments that demonstrated awareness of specific aspects of various investigations that should have been known only to law enforcement personnel. Kim's recordings captured conversations where Chen discussed the importance of maintaining community relationships and civic involvement as cover for criminal activity. Chen specifically mentioned his role in organizing search efforts for missing neighbors as an example of how legitimate community involvement could provide valuable intelligence about law enforcement activity. The key to staying safe is being exactly what people expect you to be, Chen told Kim during a conversation about operation security. I'm the helpful neighbor who organizes community activities and coordinates with police when there are problems. People trust me because I've spent years building that, and they tell me things they would never tell someone they suspected. Wano, the undercover, also revealed that Chen maintained detailed surveillance of his neighborhood surrounding area, using sophisticated equipment to monitor activity and identify potential threats. Operation. His surveillance capability explained how he had been able to stay ahead of law enforcement. Kim discovered that Chen had installed hidden cameras and listening devices throughout the Pine Ridge neighborhood, providing him with comprehensive intelligence about residents' activities and law enforcement presence. The surveillance network, sophisticated enough to detect police activities and provide advance warning of potential threats. Most disturbing was Kim's discovery that Chen had been using his surveillance network to monitor the Patterson family's activities in the months leading up to their disappearance. Chen possessed detailed records of the family's daily routines, workplace schedules, and personal relationships that suggested extensive pre-operational intelligence gathering. Chen's surveillance records Kim was able to photograph using concealed equipment included floor plans of the Patterson house, schedules of the family members' activities, and assessments of potential security risks associated with various approaches to the property. The documentation clearly indicated extensive planning for some type of operation targeting the family. The undercover operation reached a critical juncture when Chen began discussing plans for eliminating potential threats to the organization's operation. While his comments remained coded and indirect, Kim interpreted them as references to violence against individuals who might cooperate with law enforcement. Kim reported that Chen was becoming increasingly paranoid about law enforcement attention and was considering permanent solutions, problems that couldn't be resolved through other means. The conversation suggested that Chen might be planning additional violence. Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez recognized that the undercover operation had provided valuable evidence about Chen's criminal activities and his likely involvement in the Patterson disappearance. However, they still lacked direct evidence that would be sufficient execution. The investigators faced a difficult decision about whether to continue the undercover operation in hopes of obtaining more definitive evidence, or to move forward with arrests based on the information Kim had already gathered. Continuing the operation risked Chen's detection of the infiltration, while acting immediately might not produce the evidence necessary for success. The undercover operation had succeeded in penetrating Chen's criminal network more deeply than any previous law enforcement effort, but it had also revealed the true sophistication and dangerousness of the organization they were investigating. The evidence Kim had gathered would prove crucial for the next phase of the investigation, but significant challenges remained in converting that intelligence into successful criminal prosecution. By late 2009, Agent Kim's undercover operation had provided federal investigators with comprehensive evidence of Robert Chen's criminal network and strong circumstantial evidence of his involvement in the Patterson disappearance. However, Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez recognized that they needed more definitive proof to ensure successful prosecution of murder charges. The breakthrough came when Kim gained access to Chen's private office in his logistics business, where sophisticated surveillance equipment revealed a hidden storage room containing files and materials that Chen had accumulated over years of criminal activity. The room was protected by advanced security systems, but Kim's gradual acceptance into Chen's inner circle provided opportunities for accessing areas that would have been impossible to reach through traditional investigation techniques. Kim discovered that Chen maintained meticulous records of his criminal activities, apparently as insurance against betrayal by associates or protection against law enforcement prosecution. The files included detailed documentation of illegal gambling operations, money laundering transactions, and what appeared to be records of violent crimes committed by the organization. Most significantly, Kim found a file labeled Pine Ridge Containment that contained extensive documentation related to the Patterson family disappearance. The file included surveillance photographs, planning documents, and what appeared to be after-action reports detailing how the operation had been conducted and the steps taken to cover up the crime. The file revealed that Chen had been monitoring the Patterson family for months before their disappearance, apparently because David Patterson's work at Midwest Manufacturing had brought him into contact with union officials and contractors who were connected to Chen's illegal gambling. Patterson had inadvertently observed activities could have exposed the criminal network if he had reported them to law enforcement. Chen's records indicated that David Patterson had witnessed money laundering activities during routine quality control inspections at manufacturing facilities. Patterson hadn't recognized the significance of what he observed, but Chen's sources, the criminal network, had identified him as a potential security risk who needed to be neutralized. The decision to eliminate the entire Patterson family rather than just David had been made because Jennifer Patterson's position as a schoolteacher provided her with connections to law enforcement and community leaders who might have investigated her husband's disappearance more aggressively. Killing the entire family was intended to make the disappearance appear to be the result of external threats rather than criminal activities within their own neighborhood. Chen's files provided detailed information about how the Patterson murders had been planned and executed. The operation had involved 6 members of the criminal organization, including Chen himself and several associates who specialized in violence and disposal of evidence. The planning had been extensive, with contingency plans for various scenarios and detailed procedures for cleanup and cover-up activity. Agent Kim photographed the Pine Ridge containment file using concealed equipment, providing federal investigators with documentary evidence that could support murder charges against Chen and his associate. However, Kim's access to the files also put him in extreme danger if Chen discovered that his security had been compromised. The file documentation revealed that the Patterson family had been abducted from their home during the early morning hours of October 15, 2002, using techniques designed to avoid detection by neighbors or security systems. Chen's surveillance had identified the optimal timing and approach method for accessing the house without triggering any alarms or witness observation. According to Chen's record, the family had been transported to a remote warehouse outside Grand Rapids, where they were interrogated about what David Patterson observed and whom he might have told about suspicious activity. The interrogation had continued for several hours before the family was killed to prevent them from providing information to law enforcement. The bodies had been disposed of using methods that ensured they would never be recovered, including dismemberment and disposal through criminal associates who operated cremation facilities and waste disposal services. Chen's records indicated that no physical evidence of the murders remained at any location that could be discovered by law enforcement investigators. The file also contained detailed information about the cover-up operation that had followed the murders, including Chen's role in organizing search efforts and providing information to law enforcement that was designed to misdirect the investigation. His participation in the search effort had been carefully calculated to provide access to investigation information while appearing to be a concerned neighbor. Agent Kim's discovery of the Pine Ridge containment file provided the evidence that Agent Martinez and Detective Rodriguez needed to build a comprehensive prosecution case against Chen and his associate. However, extracting Kim from the undercover operation without alerting Chen to the security breach required careful planning and coordination. The investigators developed a strategy for ending Kim's undercover role while beginning preparation for arrests and searches that would prevent the criminal network from destroying evidence or eliminating witnesses. The timing had to be precise to maximize the evidence collected while minimizing the risk to Agent Kim and other potential victims. Agent Martinez coordinated with federal prosecutors to prepare charging documents and search warrants based on the evidence Kim had gathered during his undercover operation. The case file had grown to include extensive documentation of criminal activities spanning several years and involving dozens of individuals across multiple jurisdictions. Detective Rodriguez worked with local law enforcement agents to prepare for simultaneous searches and arrests that would effectively dismantle Chen's criminal network, securing evidence related to the Patterson murder. The operation would require coordination between multiple agencies and precise timing to prevent criminal associates from warning each other or destroying evidence. The investigators recognized that they had only one opportunity to successfully prosecute Chen and his associate for the Patterson murders. If the operation failed, or if key evidence was destroyed, the sophisticated criminal network would adapt to prevent future law enforcement penetration, might eliminate witnesses that posed ongoing threats. Agent Kim's undercover operation had provided unprecedented insight into Chen's criminal organization and definitive evidence of his involvement in the Patterson disappearance. However, converting this intelligence into successful prosecutions would require flawless execution of the most complex law enforcement operation in Grand Rapids history. The helpful neighbor who had organized search efforts and provided assistance to investigators for over 7 years was about to be revealed as the person responsible for the crimes he had pretended to be solved. The evidence Kim had gathered would finally provide answers to questions that had haunted Detective Rodriguez and the Patterson family for nearly 8 years. Chen's meticulous record-keeping, which had been intended to protect him from criminal associates and law enforcement prosecution, would ultimately provide the evidence necessary for his conviction. The files he had maintained as insurance against betrayal would instead become the foundation for achieving justice for the Patterson and ending his criminal enterprise. The coordinated operation to arrest Robert Chen and dismantle his criminal network began at 5:30 a.m. on March 15, 2010, with simultaneous raids at 17 locations across western Michigan. FBI SWAT team, supported by state and local law enforcement officers, executed search warrants at Chen's residence, business, and various properties associated with his criminal activity. Detective Rodriguez, now a lieutenant with the Grand Rapids Police Department, was present when federal agents approached Chen's house on Maple Creek Drive, directly next door to the still-empty Patterson residence. The irony of arresting the helpful neighbor who had organized search efforts for the very family he had murdered was not lost on any of the law enforcement officers involved in the operation. Chen's arrest was conducted without incident, though his calm demeanor suggested he had been expecting law enforcement attention. His first words upon being handcuffed were directed to Agent Martinez. "I assume this is about more than my business activities. I suppose it's finally time to discuss the neighborhood situation." The search of Chen's properties yielded extensive evidence that corroborated Agent Kim's undercover findings and provided additional documentation of criminal activities spanning nearly a decade. The hidden storage room in Chen's office contained not only the Pine Ridge containment file, but also records related to several other violent crimes committed by his organization. Most significantly, investigators discovered a detailed video recording system that Chen had used to document various criminal activities, apparently as leverage against associates and protection against potential betrayal. Among the recorded materials, footage related to Patterson murders provided graphic evidence. Chen's surveillance and recording equipment was more sophisticated than investigators had anticipated, including hidden cameras throughout his own properties and covert monitoring devices that had been installed in various around the. His surveillance network had provided comprehensive intelligence about residents' activities and law enforcement for years. The video evidence discovered during the search included recordings of planning meetings where Chen and his associates had discussed the Patterson operation, footage of surveillance activities conducted before the murders, and disturbing documentation of the actual crimes themselves. The recordings provided irrefutable evidence of Chen's leadership role in the criminal organization and his direct involvement in the family's death. Faced with overwhelming evidence, the prospect of death penalty charges, Chen's attorney advised him cooperation with federal prosecutors represented his only hope for avoiding execution. Chen was informed that the government possessed video recordings, documentary evidence, and witness testimony that would support capital murder charges for killing 4 people, including 2 children. After consulting with his attorney for 2 days, Chen agreed to provide full cooperation in exchange for a plea agreement that would spare him the death penalty. The negotiation process required approval from federal prosecutors in Washington, given the severity of the charges and the high-profile nature of the case. On March 18, 2010, Robert Chen began providing his detailed confession about the Patterson murders and his criminal organization's activity. The confession sessions were conducted in a secure federal facility with Agent Martinez, Detective Rodriguez, and federal prosecutors present to ensure a complete documentation statement. Chen's confession revealed that his decision to eliminate the Patterson family had been motivated by David Patterson's inadvertent observation of money laundering activities at manufacturing facilities where Chen's organization processed illegal gambling profit. Patterson had witnessed meetings and financial transactions that could have exposed the entire criminal network if he had reported them to law enforcement. David Patterson was a quality control supervisor who took his job seriously. Chen during his confession. He noticed when things didn't seem right, and he asked questions about activities he observed. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he had started documenting irregularities and discussing them with his supervisor. We couldn't allow him to continue investigating activities that would eventually lead to our. Chen detailed the extensive surveillance operation that had preceded the murders, including months of monitoring the Patterson family's daily routines, works, and personal relationships. His organization had used sophisticated electronic surveillance and physical observation to develop comprehensive intelligence about the family's activities and potential security vulnerabilities. The murders had been planned as a containment operation designed to eliminate the Patterson family while creating the appearance that they had been abducted by external threats. Chen's role in organizing search efforts had been integral to the cover-up strategy, providing him with access to investigation information while allowing him to misdirect law enforcement attention away from the neighborhood and his organization. Chen's confession included graphic details about the actual murders which had taken place at a warehouse facility owned by one of his business associates. The family had been transported from their home during the early morning hours of October 15, 2002, and taken to the warehouse where they were interrogated about what David Patterson had observed and whom he might have told about suspicious activity. We needed to be certain that David hadn't shared information with anyone who continued investigating after it appeared, Chen explained. The interrogation was necessary to identify potential security risks and ensure that eliminating the family would completely resolve the threat to our operation. The confession revealed that Jennifer, Emma, and Sophie Patterson had been killed primarily to eliminate potential witnesses and create a more convincing disappearance scenario. Chen's organization had determined that abducting only David Patterson would generate more intensive law enforcement investigation than eliminating the entire family, which could be attributed to various external threats. Chen provided detailed information about the disposal of the bodies which had been dismembered and destroyed using cremation facilities operated by criminal associates. The remains had been processed through legitimate funeral homes and crematoriums, ensuring that no physical evidence would ever be recovered that could connect the deaths to Chen's organization. The confession also revealed the extent of corruption within law enforcement agencies that had protected Chen's criminal activity for years. Several police officers, sheriffs, deputies, and even federal agents had received payments from Chen's organization in exchange for information about ongoing investigation and advance warning of potential law enforcement operations. Chen identified specific law enforcement personnel who had provided protection for his criminal activities, including officers who had shared information about the Patterson investigation and helped misdirect the search effort. The corruption had extended to prosecutors and judges who had received payments for favorable treatment of criminal associates when they were arrested on various charges. Most shocking was Chen's revelation that he had been providing regular intelligence reports to his criminal associate about the progress of various law enforcement investigations, including detailed information about investigative techniques, potential witnesses, planned operations. His access to this information had come through corrupt personnel and his own sophisticated surveillance capabilities. The confession sessions continued for 6 days as prosecutors worked to verify details and obtain complete information about all aspects of Chen's criminal organization. His cooperation provided the foundation for understanding nearly a decade of criminal activity and systematic corruption that had enabled his organization to operate with relative impunity. Chen's detailed confession resolved the 8-year mystery of what had happened to the Patterson family while revealing the sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating in plain sight throughout western Michigan. His willingness to provide complete information in exchange for avoiding the death penalty gave investigators the evidence necessary to pursue prosecution and the corrupt official who had protected. However, Chen's confession also demonstrated the cold, calculating nature of his crimes and his complete lack of remorse for murdering an innocent family to protect his illegal activity. His matter-of-fact description of planning and executing the murders, combined with his years of deceptive behavior as a helpful neighbor, revealed the true sociopathic nature of his character. The detailed confession provided closure for the Patterson family's relatives and friends who had waited 8 years for answers about their loved one's fate. However, the graphic details of the murders and the revelation that the helpful neighbor they had trusted was actually the killer created additional trauma for community members who had worked closely with Chen during the search. The physical evidence recovered during the arrests and searches provided comprehensive corroboration for Robert Chen's confession and revealed the true sophistication of his criminal organization. Federal forensic specialists spent weeks analyzing materials seized from Chen's properties, uncovering a treasure trove of documentation that detailed years of criminal activity. The video recording system discovered in Chen's office contained hundreds of hours of footage documenting various criminal activity, including the planning sessions, surveillance operations, and actual execution of the Patterson murders. The recordings had been maintained as insurance against potential betrayal by criminal associates, but they provided prosecutors with irrefutable evidence of the organization crime. The most disturbing recordings showed Chen and its discussing the Patterson operation with chilling casual, treating the murder of a family routine business decision necessary for their illegal activity. The planning discussions revealed the careful consideration that had been given to various operational details and potential complications. Additional video evidence included footage of Chen conducting surveillance of the Patterson family in the months leading up to their deaths, showing him observing their daily routines and identifying vulnerability that could be exploited during the abductions. The surveillance footage demonstrated the extensive preparation that had preceded the murders. Most shocking were the recordings of the actual interrogation and murder of the Patterson family, which Chen had apparently preserved as evidence of the thoroughness with which containment had been conducted. The footage was graphic and traumatic, requiring specialized handling by forensic specialists and victim advocates who worked to prepare it for potential court presentation. Detective Rodriguez found viewing the murder recordings to be one of the most difficult experiences of her law enforcement career. Seeing the Patterson family's final hours after 8 years of searching for answers about their fate provided closure, but also confronted her with the brutal reality of what Chen had done to innocent neighbors who had trusted him. Watching those recordings was like seeing 8 years of investigation come to a horrific conclusion, Rodriguez later told Agent Martinez. We knew Chen was responsible, but seeing the actual crimes he committed against that family was almost unbearable. The fact that he preserved those recordings as some kind of trophy makes it even more disturbing. The documentary evidence seized from Chen's files provided detailed information about the criminal organization structure, operation, and financial activities spanning nearly a decade. The records revealed sophisticated money laundering operations, illegal gambling networks, and systematic corruption of public officials that had enabled the organization to operate with minimal law enforcement interference. Financial analysis of the seized records revealed that Chen's criminal organization had generated tens of millions of dollars in illegal profits through gambling operations, loan sharking, and money laundering services provided to other criminal enterprises throughout the Midwest. The sophisticated financial system had been designed avoided by traditional law enforcement. The Pine Ridge containment file that Agent Kim had discovered during his undercover operation contained comprehensive documentation of the Patterson murders, including operational planning documents, personnel assignment, and after-action reports that detailed how the cover-up had been conducted. Most valuable from an evidentiary standpoint were Chen's detailed records of payments made to corrupt law enforcement officers, prosecutors, and judges who had provided protection for his criminal activities. The financial records included specific dates, amounts, and descriptions of services rendered, providing prosecutors with evidence necessary for execution. Chen's surveillance records revealed the extensive intelligence gathering operation he had conducted against his neighbors, law enforcement office, and potential threats to his organization. The surveillance network had included hidden cameras, electronic monitoring devices, and human sources who provided regular reports about activities in the Pine Ridge neighborhood and surrounding areas. The forensic analysis also revealed that Chen had been conducting counter-surveillance operations designed to detect law enforcement attention and identify potential threats to his organization. His sophisticated understanding of police investigation techniques had enabled him to stay ahead of law enforcement efforts for years while maintaining his public image as a helpful community member. Computer forensic specialists recovered encrypted files containing communications between Chen and criminal associates throughout the Midwest, revealing the scope of his organization's activities and connections to other criminal enterprises in Detroit, Chicago, and several smaller cities. The recovered communication provided evidence of ongoing criminal conspiracy that extended far beyond the Patterson. The evidence analysis also revealed that Chen had been providing regular intelligence to organized crime figures in other cities, sharing information about law enforcement activities and potential business opportunities in western Michigan. His role as an intelligence coordinator had made him a valuable criminal organization throughout the region. Physical evidence recovered from the warehouse where the Patterson murders had occurred included traces of DNA and other forensic materials that corroborated Chen's confession and the video recording. Despite the extensive cleanup efforts, forensic specialists were able to recover evidence that confirmed the family had been held and killed at that location. The forensic evidence also included analysis of Chen's personal vehicles and equipment, revealing traces of materials that supported his confession about transporting the family and disposing of their remains. The scientific evidence provided independent corroboration for the details Chen had provided in his statements to investigators. Agent Martinez coordinated the analysis federal laboratory, ensuring that all materials courtroom standard and withstand challenges. Defense of the comprehensive evidence included video recordings, documentary material, financial records, forensic analysis, and witness testimony that created an overwhelming case against Chen and his associates. The evidence revealed that Chen's criminal organization had been responsible for several other disappearances and suspicious deaths throughout western Michigan, providing prosecutors with additional charges that could be filed against surviving organization members. The comprehensive nature of Chen's record-keeping had inadvertently created evidence that could be used to solve multiple cold cases. Detective Rodriguez worked with federal prosecutors to organize the massive amount of evidence into a coherent presentation that could be understood by juries and judges who would be responsible for determining the fates of Chen and his criminal associates. The evidence organization process required months of work by teams of analysts and legal professionals. The unveiled evidence provided definitive answers to questions that had puzzled investigators for 8 years, while revealing the true scope of criminal activity that had been occurring in their community. Chen's careful documentation of his crime, maintained for his own protection, had instead provided the tools necessary for achieving justice for his victims. The evidence package would support not only murder charges against Chen, but also racketeering prosecutions against his associates and corruption charges against law enforcement officials who had protected the organization. The comprehensive nature of the evidence ensured that the entire criminal network could be dismantled and prosecuted successfully. However, the evidence also revealed the emotional toll that the investigation had taken on everyone involved, from family members who had waited years for answers to law enforcement officers who had been unknowingly working alongside the person responsible for the crimes they were trying to solve. The prosecution of Robert Chen and his criminal associates began on September 12, 2011, in federal court in Grand Rapids, with Chen facing capital murder charges for the deaths of David, Jennifer, Emma, and Sophie Patterson. The trial attracted national media attention due to the case's unusual circumstances and the shocking revelation that the helpful neighbor who had organized search efforts was actually the killer. Federal prosecutor, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Jennifer Walsh, presented a comprehensive case that included video evidence, documentary materials, Chen's detailed confession, and testimony from law enforcement officers who had investigated the case for nearly a decade. The prosecution's opening statement outlined the systematic nature of Chen's crime and the sophisticated cover-up that had nearly succeeded in hiding the truth. Robert Chen spent 8 years living next door to the home where he murdered an entire family, pretending to be a concerned neighbor while actively sabotaging the investigation into his own crime, Walsh told the jury in her opening statement. He organized search efforts, provided suggestions to investigators, and maintained the facade of a helpful community member while knowing exactly where the Patterson family was. It killed them. Chen's defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Michael Davidson, faced the challenge of defending against overwhelming evidence that included video recordings of the murders and Chen's own detailed. Davidson's strategy focused on portraying Chen as a mid-level participant in a larger criminal organization who had been coerced into participating in violence by more dangerous associates. However, the prosecution's evidence clearly demonstrated that Chen had been the leader of the criminal organization and the primary architect of the Patterson murders. Video recordings showed Chen directing the operation and making key decisions about how the crimes would be conducted and covered up. Agent Martinez testified for 3 days about the investigation's progression from the initial disappearance through the undercover operation that had finally penetrated Chen's organization. Her testimony provided crucial context for understanding how Chen had manipulated the investigation while maintaining his helpful public persona. Chen's participation in the search efforts was the most audacious aspect of his cover-up strategy, Martinez told the jury. He positioned himself as our most reliable civilian source, providing suggestions and information that seemed helpful, but were actually designed to keep us from looking in the right places. His access to investigation information allowed him to stay ahead of our efforts for years. Detective Rodriguez's testimony was particularly emotional, as she described working closely with Chen for months while unknowingly seeking answers about crimes he had committed. Her detailed account of Chen's seemingly helpful behavior provided stark contrast to the video evidence that showed him planning and executing the murders. Robert Chen was the person I trusted most among our civilian contacts. He seemed genuinely concerned about finding the Patterson family, and his organizational skills, community knowledge, were invaluable for coordinating search efforts. Learning that he was actually the killer was one of the most shocking revelations of my law enforcement career. The prosecution's presentation of video evidence was carefully managed to convey the essential facts while minimizing the traumatic impact on jurors and court personnel. Edited segments showed key moments from the planning discussions and enough of the actual crimes to establish Chen's direct involvement without subjecting viewers to unnecessarily graphic. The video evidence was devastating for Chen's defense, as it showed him clearly directing the operation and making statements that contradicted any claim that he was acting under coercion. His calm, business-like demeanor while discussing the murders demonstrated the calculated nature of his crime. Expert witnesses testified about the sophisticated surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques Chen had employed to monitor law enforcement activity and protect his criminal organization. The testimony revealed that Chen's methods rivaled those used by professional intelligence and demonstrated extensive knowledge of law enforcement procedure. Financial experts explained the complex money laundering operation that had motivated the Patterson murders, showing how David Patterson's inadvertent observations of irregular activities could have exposed criminal operations worth millions of dollars. The financial testimony provided context for understanding why Chen had viewed the family as an existential threat to his organization. Dr. Sarah Chen, forensic psychiatrist, Chen, provided expert testimony about Chen's psychological profile and the motivations for his crime. Her analysis suggested that Chen was a sophisticated sociopath who was capable of maintaining elaborate deceptions while feeling no genuine remorse for his victim. Robert Chen demonstrates classic characteristics of antisocial personality disorder combined with exceptional intelligence and organizational ability. His ability to maintain a helpful, concerned persona while actively sabotaging the investigation into his own crimes reflects a level of psychological manipulation that is extremely rare and particularly dangerous. The prosecution also presented testimony from several of Chen's criminal associates who had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for reduced sentences. Their testimony provided additional evidence of Chen's leadership role in the criminal organization and direct involvement in planning the Patterson. Vincent Torino's testimony was particularly damaging to Chen's defense, as he described conversations where Chen had discussed the necessity of eliminating the Patterson family to protect the criminal organization. Torino's cooperation had been crucial for understanding the structure of Operation Chen's. The defense's case was severely limited by the overwhelming evidence against Chen, particularly the video recordings that showed him planning and participating in the murders. Davidson's strategy focused on arguing that Chen should receive life imprisonment rather than the death penalty, citing his cooperation with investigators and the value of his information for prosecuting other criminal enterprise. Chen chose not to testify in his own defense, a decision that legal observers interpreted as recognition that cross-examination would only reinforce the prosecution's case. His confession had already provided detailed admissions of guilt, and additional testimony could not improve his legal position. The prosecution's closing argument emphasized the calculated nature of Chen's crimes and his complete lack of remorse for murdering an innocent family. Assistant U.S. Attorney Walsh argued that Chen's sophisticated cover-up and years of deception demonstrated exactly the kind of premeditated, cold-blooded murder that warranted the death penalty. Robert Chen didn't just murder 4 innocent people, Walsh told the jury during closing. He spent 8 years living next to their empty house, pretending to help search for them, while knowing he had killed them. He manipulated investigators, misdirected search efforts, and maintained his deception with such skill that he nearly succeeded in committing the perfect crime. The defense's closing argument focused on Chen's cooperation with investigators and argued that life imprisonment would be sufficient punishment while allowing him to continue providing valuable information about other criminal activities. Davidson emphasized that Chen's confession had solved not only the Patterson case, but it also provided evidence for prosecuting other serious crimes. The jury deliberated for 2 days before returning guilty verdicts on all charges against Robert Chen, including 4 counts of first-degree murder and multiple racketeering charges. The capital murder convictions automatically triggered penalty phase proceedings to determine whether Chen would receive life imprisonment or the death penalty. The guilty verdicts provided closure for the Patterson family's relatives and friends who had waited nearly 9 years for justice. However, the penalty phase proceedings would determine whether Chen's crimes warranted the ultimate punishment under federal law. Chen's conviction marked the successful conclusion of one of the most complex and unusual criminal investigations in Michigan history, but several of his associates remained to be prosecuted, and the broader implications of the case continued to reverberate throughout western Michigan's law enforcement community. The penalty phase of Robert Chen's trial began on November 7, 2011, with federal prosecutors arguing that the calculated nature of his crimes and his years of deceptive cover-up warranted the death penalty. The prosecution presented victim impact tests from Patterson family relatives and evidence of Chen's leadership role in additional violent crimes committed by his organization. David Patterson's brother Michael provided emotional testimony about the impact of losing his entire family and the additional trauma of learning that their trusted neighbor had been responsible for their deaths. The victim impact statements painted a picture of a loving family whose lives had been cut short by Chen's cold-blooded calculation that they posed a threat to his criminal enterprise. David, Jennifer, Emma, and Sophie were not just statistics in a criminal case. Michael Patterson told the jury through tears they were beloved family members who trusted their neighbors and never imagined that someone living next door could be capable of such evil. The fact that Robert Chen spent years pretending to help search for them while knowing he had killed them demonstrates a level of cruelty that defies comprehension. The prosecution also presented evidence of Chen's involvement in at least 3 other murders committed by his criminal organization, including the deaths of potential witnesses and criminal associates who had posed threats to the network's operation. The additional murders demonstrated a pattern of violence that supported arguments for the death penalty. Chen's defense team, led by attorney Michael Davidson, presented mitigation evidence aimed at persuading jurors to impose life imprisonment rather than execution. The defense testimony focused on Chen's cooperation with investigators and his assistance in solving multiple cold cases throughout western Michigan. Expert witnesses testified that Chen's information had been crucial for dismantling criminal organizations throughout the Midwest and had prevented additional violent crimes by eliminating networks that had been responsible for drug trafficking, illegal gambling, and money laundering operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Dr. Patricia Williams, forensic psychiatry trained by defense, testified that Chen's antisocial personality was a mitigating factor that should be considered when determining his sentence. However, her testimony was undermined by prosecution's evidence Chen's illogical condition had made him more dangerous rather than less culpable for his crime. The penalty phase proceedings lasted 2 weeks. Both sides presented comprehensive arguments about whether Chen's crimes warranted the ultimate punishment. The jury's decision would determine not only Chen's fate, but also send a message about society's response to sophisticated criminal enterprises that used extreme violence to protect their operation. On November 21, 2011, the jury recommended death sentences for the murders of all 4 Patterson family members, finding that the aggravating circumstances of the crimes outweighed any mitigating factors presented by the defense. The formal sentencing was scheduled for January 15, 2012, pending completion of pre-sentence investigations and legal procedure. The death sentences were controversial within the legal community, with some experts arguing that Chen's cooperation with investigators should have resulted in life imprisonment rather than execution. However, prosecutors and many community members felt that the calculated nature of his crime and his years of deception justified the harshest possible punishment. The trials of Chen's criminal associates continued throughout 2012 and 2013, with most defendants pleading guilty to avoid lengthy prison sentence. The cooperative testimony provided by early defendants created a cascade effect that made defending the remaining cases increasingly difficult for criminal defense attorneys. Vincent Torino received a sentence of 25 years in federal prison for his role in money laundering operations and his knowledge of the Patterson murders without reporting them to authority. His cooperation with investigators was credited with helping to dismantle criminal networks throughout the Midwest. The trials also revealed the extent of corruption within law enforcement agencies that had protected Chen's organization for years. 7 police officers, 3 sheriff's deputies, and 2 federal agents were convicted of corruption charges related to accepting payments from Chen's criminal network in exchange for information and protection. Detective Rodriguez, now Lieutenant Rodriguez, worked with internal affairs investigators to identify and prosecute corrupt personnel who had compromised the Patterson investigation. The corruption cases required careful investigation to distinguish between officers who had been genuinely deceived by Chen and those who had actively participated in protecting his criminal activity. The most shocking corruption case involved Grand Rapids Police Captain William Morrison, who had received over $150,000 from Chen's organization over several years in exchange for information about ongoing investigation, advance warning of planned law enforcement operations. Morrison's betrayal had been particularly damaging because of his access to sensitive information and his influence over investigation priority. The corruption investigations led to comprehensive reforms in law enforcement agencies throughout, including improved internal oversight procedures and new protocols for preventing unauthorized. The Patterson case also prompted legislative changes in Michigan's witness protection procedures and protocols for coordinating between federal and local law enforcement agencies. The systematic failures that had enabled Chen to manipulate the investigation for years highlighted the need for better security measures and information control. Community members in the Pine Ridge neighborhood struggled to cope with the revelation that their trusted neighbor and volunteer coordinator had been responsible for murdering the family he had pretended to be helping find. Many residents reported feeling betrayed, violated by Chen's years of deception and manipulation. The Pine Ridge Elementary School, where Chen had organized many of his search coordination activities, installed a memorial garden honoring the Patterson family and other victims of violent crime. The memorial served as a reminder of the important community vigilance and the need to support law enforcement efforts to combat sophisticated criminal enterprise. Chen's house on Maple Creek Drive was demolished in late 2012, with the empty lot serving as a permanent reminder of the crimes that had been planned and coordinated from that. The Patterson house next door was eventually sold to a family who were unaware of its history, though the new owners later learned about the case through media coverage. Agent Martinez received a commendation from FBI Director Robert Mueller for her leadership of the investigation that had ultimately solved one of Michigan's most complex criminal cases. Her patient, methodical approach and willingness to pursue unconventional investigative techniques had been crucial for penetrating Chen's sophisticated criminal organization. Lieutenant Rodriguez was promoted to captain within the Grand Rapids Police Department and became a national expert on investigating sophisticated criminal enterprises that employ counter-surveillance and counterintelligence techniques. Her experience with the Patterson case led to consulting opportunities with law enforcement agencies facing similar challenges. The case also had broader implications for understanding how organized crime had evolved to exploit weaknesses in traditional law, and Chen's ability to maintain his cover, actively sabotaging investigation, demonstrated the need for enhanced security measures and more sophisticated investigative techniques. Agent Kim, who had conducted the crucial undercover operation, left the FBI in 2013 to work in private security after struggling with psychological effects from his years of infiltrating Chen's organization. His sacrifice had been essential for gathering the evidence necessary to solve the case, but the personal cost was significant. The successful prosecution of Chen and his associates marked the end of one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in Michigan history, but it also revealed vulnerabilities in law enforcement systems that required ongoing attention and improvement. The case became a text of how modern criminal organizations exploit weaknesses in traditional. Robert Chen was executed by lethal injection on August 14, 2018, exactly 16 years after the Patterson family disappeared from their Pine Ridge neighborhood home. His final statement expressed no remorse for his crimes, instead claiming that his actions had been necessary business decisions required to protect legitimate commercial interests. The execution took place at the Federal Correctional Complex in Terre Haute, Indiana, with witnesses including Lieutenant Rodriguez, Agent Martinez, and Michael Patterson, the brother of murdered family patriarch David Patterson. For the investigators who had pursued the case for 16 years, Chen's death provided a sense of closure for one of the most challenging investigations of their careers. Watching Robert Chen's execution was the final chapter of a case that consumed 16 years of my professional life, Rodriguez reflected. He showed no remorse, even at the end, which confirmed everything we learned about his character. Justice was finally achieved for the Patterson family, but the cost in terms of time, resources, and emotional impact was enormous. The Patterson case became a landmark investigation that influenced law enforcement approaches to sophisticated organized crime throughout the United States. Chen's ability to maintain his cover while actively sabotaging the investigation demonstrated vulnerabilities in traditional investigative methods that required new approaches and enhanced security measures. Federal law enforcement agencies developed new protocols for information security and counterintelligence based on lessons learned from Chen's manipulation of the investigation. The case highlighted the need for compartmentalized information and enhanced background checks. Civilian volunteers who work closely with law enforcement. The Michigan State Police established a new cold case unit that specialized in investigating sophisticated criminal enterprises using enhanced surveillance techniques, financial analysis, and undercover operations. The unit's methods were directly influenced by the techniques that had finally succeeded in penetrating Chen's organization and gathering evidence of his crime. Lieutenant Rodriguez, now Captain Rodriguez, became the founding director of the new cold case unit and developed training programs that taught investigators how to identify and counter sophisticated criminal deception and manipulation technique. Her experience, Chen's psychological manipulation, became a cornerstone of law enforcement training curricula. Agent Martinez was promoted to Assistant Director of the FBI's Organized Crime Division and led efforts to develop enhanced investigative techniques for penetrating criminal organizations that employed counter-surveillance and counterintelligence methods. Her work on the Patterson case became a model for complex long-term investigation. The Pine Ridge neighborhood gradually recovered from the trauma of learning that their trusted neighbor had been a killer, but the experience left lasting impact on community dynamics and residents' willingness to trust neighbors and participate in volunteer activities. Many residents reported ongoing anxiety about the possibility that other neighbors might be concealing dangerous secrets. The demolished Chen property was eventually converted into a small park dedicated to the memory of crime victim family. The park included a memorial honoring the Patterson and served as a reminder of the important community vigilance support. The Patterson family home was eventually purchased by a family who learned about its history, but chose to remain in the neighborhood as a way of reclaiming the community from the legacy of Chen's crime. Their decision to stay demonstrated resilience and determination to prevent Chen's actions from permanently destroying the sense of community that had characterized Pine Ridge. The case files for the Patterson investigation filled an entire conference room at Grand Rapids Police Department headquarters, serving as a resource for training investigators and a comprehensive record of one of the most complex criminal investigations in Michigan history. The files became required reading for detectives specializing in organized crime and sophisticated criminal enterprises. Several books and documentaries were produced about the Patterson case, focusing on the psychological aspect of Chen's deception and the investigative techniques that had ultimately exposed crime. The case became a frequent subject of criminal justice courses at universities throughout the United States. The undercover operation conducted by Agent Kim became a textbook example of long-term infiltration technique, though Kim's experience also highlighted the psychological costs of extended undercover work. New protocols were developed for supporting agents who conduct long-term undercover operations based on lessons learned from Kim's experience. Chen's criminal organization had been completely dismantled by 2015, with most associates either convicted and imprisoned or eliminated by rival criminal groups that moved into territories previously controlled by Chen's network. The organization's collapse created opportunities for law enforcement agencies to prevent other criminal enterprises from filling the power vacuum. The corruption investigations triggered by the Patterson led to the prosecution of 12 law enforcement officers and several prosecutors and judges who had accepted payments from Chen's organization. The comprehensive cleanup effort restored public confidence in law enforcement integrity, but also demonstrated the scope of corruption that sophisticated criminal enterprise could achieve. Financial analysis of Chen's criminal organization revealed that his network had generated over $50 million in illegal profit during its decade of operation, with most of the money laundered through legitimate businesses or hidden in offshore accounts. Recovery efforts continued for several years after Chen's execution, with funds eventually distributed to victims of his crimes and law enforcement. Captain Rodriguez retired from the Grand Rapids Police Department in 2020 after a distinguished career that was defined largely by her work on the Patterson case. She established a consulting firm that specialized in training law enforcement agencies to investigate sophisticated criminal enterprises and counter advanced deception techniques. Agent Martinez continued her work at the FBI's Organized Crime Division until her retirement in 2022, overseeing investigations that dismantled criminal organizations throughout the United States using techniques developed during the Patterson investigation. Her career achievements were recognized with numerous awards and commendations from federal law enforcement agencies. The 20th anniversary of the Patterson family's disappearance in 2022 was marked by a memorial service at Pine Ridge Elementary School, attended by family members, investigators, and community members who had participated in the original search effort. The service provided an opportunity for reflection on the case's impact and the importance of never giving up the pursuit of justice. For the Grand Rapids community, the Patterson case served as a reminder that evil can hide behind facades of helpfulness and community involvement, but also demonstrated that patient, dedicated investigation can ultimately expose even the most sophisticated criminal deception. The case became a defining moment in the city's history and a testament to the importance of perseverance in pursuit of the helpful neighbor who had joined the search effort while knowing the killer had finally been brought to justice, but his crimes lasting impacts on everyone who had been touched by his deception. The resolution of the case provided closure for the Patterson family and the community, but also served as a permanent reminder of the capacity for evil that can exist behind even the most convincing mask of respectability and concern.